Deep beneath the tranquil surface of 1960s suburban progress, a series of chilling, unexplained disappearances and classified military failures began to suggest that the decade of peace and love was actually a carefully constructed mask for a reality far more terrifying than the Cold War itself. We like to look back at the 60s through this hazy, technicolor lens of moon landings and music festivals, but if you peel back the wallpaper of that era, you find something that doesn't just feel like a conspiracy theory, it feels like a glitch in the collective memory of the world. Imagine a decade where the brightest minds in science were suddenly vanishing into thin air, where entire nuclear submarines simply blinked out of existence without a trace of debris, and where the very fabric of what we considered normal was being rewritten by events that the government to this day refuses to acknowledge. It starts with a series of high-altitude disappearances that defies every law of physics we understood at the time. You have to realize that during the height of the space race, the pressure to achieve the impossible led to some truly dark corners of experimentation that were never meant to see the light of day. But then things started getting strange in ways that had nothing to do with rockets or satellites. In 1962, a group of researchers working on advanced psychological mapping in a secluded facility in Oregon simply stopped communicating with the outside world, and when authorities finally broke down the doors, they found the building completely empty, yet every meal was still warm on the table, and every car was still parked in the lot. It was as if dozens of people had been plucked from reality in a single heartbeat, leaving behind a silence that has lasted for over 60 years. Therefore, we have to ask ourselves what was really happening in those secret labs, because the official reports talk about administrative closures, while the locals still tell stories of strange, humming lights that pulsed from the forest for weeks before the disappearance. But the mystery doesn't stop with missing scientists. It moves into the very heart of our military's most secure assets. Think about the USS Thresher, a nuclear-powered submarine that was the pride of the Navy, which just vanished in 1963 during a routine deep-dive test. Now the official story is a pipe failure, but the acoustic data recorded by nearby sensors tells a story of a sound that wasn't an explosion or a crush, but a rhythmic, metallic grinding that lasted for nearly 30 seconds before silence took over. So we're left with this lingering doubt that maybe the ocean floor holds secrets that were never meant to be disturbed, or perhaps something down there was looking back at us. This brings us to the Green Flash, incidents of 1965, a series of sightings across the Midwestern United States that the Air Force dismissed as mass hysteria, yet those who saw it describe a visual phenomenon so intense it left permanent shadows burned into the sides of barns. It's like when you stare at a bright light and then close your eyes, only the image doesn't go away, it stays there, etched into your retinas and the very wood of your home. But then, as the decade progressed, these anomalies began to shift from the physical to the psychological, manifesting in what researchers now call the London fog of 11,966. It wasn't weather, it was a collective sensory blackout, where thousands of people reported losing exactly 4 hours of their lives simultaneously, only to wake up, standing in different parts of the city with no memory of how they got there. Imagine the terror of standing at a bus stop and suddenly it's dark, your watch has jumped forward, and everyone around you is wearing the same expression of sheer, vacant horror. Because of this, the government initiated a massive, clandestine study into urban atmospheric anomalies, which is just a fancy way of saying they had no idea why a city's worth of people just skipped a Tuesday afternoon. This leads us directly into the most haunting piece of the puzzle, which is the children of the corn phenomenon in rural Nebraska in 1967, long before the stories were ever written. There are records of an entire elementary school class that walked out into a field during recess and were never seen again, despite the field being surrounded by open plains for miles in every direction. It's as if they walked into a curtain that simply wasn't there when the search parties arrived an hour later. So, you have this pattern emerging of a world that is becoming increasingly unstable, where the boundaries between what is possible and what is happening are blurring into a nightmare. We often think of the 1960s as a time of social revolution, but maybe it was actually a time of reality-level decay. But then we have to consider the voice from the void, transmissions that ham radio operators began picking up in 1968. These weren't just random signals, they were sophisticated mathematical sequences that seemed to be coming from the dark side of the moon, months before Apollo 11 ever got there. The transmissions were in a language that sounded like a mixture of human static and bird calls, and those who listened to them for too long reported a strange, lingering sense of dread that they couldn't shake for years. It's like hearing a secret you were never supposed to know, and the weight of that knowledge starts to crush you from the inside out. Therefore, when we look at the Apollo missions, we have to wonder if they weren't just going there to plant a flag, but to investigate a signal that was already telling us we weren't alone. But as the decade came to a close, the anomalies reached a fever pitch with the static storms of 1969. These weren't electrical storms. They were localized areas where all electronic communication simply ceased to function, and people reported seeing doubles of themselves walking across the street. It's like a mirror had shattered and the reflections were trying to crawl out into the real world. So the 1960s didn't just end, they fractured. We have this idea that history is a straight line, but the evidence from this decade suggests it's more like a frayed rope, with strands of mystery and terror woven into every year. Think about the Project Looking Glass rumors that surfaced in the late 60s, claiming the military had developed a way to see mere seconds into the future, only to find that every time they looked, the image was different, as if the future was constantly being rewritten by an unseen hand. It's like trying to read a book while someone is erasing the pages as fast as you can turn them. But then, the project was abruptly shut down, and all personnel were reassigned to remote outposts in Antarctica, never to be heard from again. This is the reality of the unexplained 1960s, a period where the more we tried to control our world, the more it seemed to slip through our fingers. Even the music of the time, often celebrated for its creativity, contains these weird, dissonant frequencies in the master tapes that engineers can't explain, almost like there was a third party in the recording studio that no one remembered being there. It's as if the very air of the 60s was vibrating at a frequency that invited things from the outside in. So, we're left with a history that is full of holes, filled with people who disappeared, technology that failed for no reason, and events that defy logic. But perhaps the most disturbing part is how quickly we've forgotten it all, how the official narrative has smoothed over the jagged edges of a decade that was anything but peaceful. It's like we've collectively decided to look away from the monster in the room, because the alternative is admitting that we don't understand the world we live in. But then again, maybe the glitches of the 60s were just a warning for something that is still happening today, just beneath the surface of our modern lives. We see the patterns repeating, the strange disappearances, the technological anomalies, and the sense that time itself isn't as solid as we think. It's like we're living in a house with hidden rooms that we're too afraid to open, even though we can hear something moving on the other side of the door. And as we look back at those grainy black and white photos of the 1960s, we have to wonder what's hiding in the shadows just out of frame, waiting for us to notice it. The decade of the 60s wasn't just a time of change, it was a time of revelation, and what it revealed was a reality far more fragile and frightening than anything we could have imagined. We think we know our history, but the deeper you dig, the more you realize that the most important parts are the ones that were never written down. It's like a puzzle where half the pieces were thrown away before the game even started, leaving us to guess at the picture based on the few fragments we have left. And those fragments point to a world that is not what it seems, a world where the laws of nature are more like suggestions, and the past is a foreign country where they do things very differently. So as you move forward, remember that the silence of the 1960s isn't an absence of noise. It's a scream that we've just learned to tune out. But the more you listen, the more you realize that the echoes of that decade are still vibrating in the air around us, waiting for the right moment to return. There's a reason the files on these events are still classified after 60 years, and it's not just to protect the reputations of dead politicians. It's because the truth of what happened in those years is so fundamentally world-altering that we might not be able to handle it even now. It's like finding out your parents aren't who they say they are, and your entire childhood was a staged production for an audience you can't see. But then, you start to see the cracks in the set, the moments where the actors forget their lines, and the reality of the situation begins to bleed through. The unexplained 1960s are those cracks, and if you stare into them long enough, you might just see what's truly on the other side.